Oh, okay. I haven't heard from Aura, so I don't know what the status of the exporter is for Maya. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I also know she's usually always so busy, um, most of the time anyway. So yeah, if she's on vacation, then uh, that probably explains it as well. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Tigger. Yeah. No animations with scales, just rotations and translations. Um, they would have to totally revamp the animation in order to allow scales. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, for animating, um, Yeah, right now I use two different skeletons. I use a skeleton specifically designed for animating, and so I technically use two skeletons, one for rigging too and one for animating, although Aura, I think she's made it possible that we're only going to need to use one skeleton, just the skeleton that you use to rig to. Hi, Tiger. Right. Yeah, that's basically what I was doing in Maya Star, using two separate skeletons. The animation skeleton was constrained to the regular skeleton that you rig to. But as far as I can tell, I don't think you actually need to do that anymore. Once Aura gets her exporter done, and I think she did update the BBH exporter so that I wouldn't have to use two skeletons, but I have to look into that. Yeah, the benefit of using the two skeletons method that I use, which is very similar to Blender's, is that in Maya Star, the skeleton that you rig to has a whole bunch of incoming connections for the sliders to simulate the sliders, the appearance sliders, and so that I could strain the animation skeleton to the rigging skeleton, so that people, if they wanted to animate, say, a really tall avatar, they could see exactly how it was going to look by changing the slider settings to make the avatar taller, and then the animation skeleton went along for the ride. And then I think I had IK handles on the rigging skeleton, and then you would animate the rigging skeleton, and it would move the animation skeleton. Yeah, there are a lot of bones. There's a lot of stuff to keep track now. Yeah, Avastar took the approach. Matrice and Gaia, I know they like using programming to take the XML files and to re-simulate what's going on in Second Life in Blender, which is really great, because then if there's any changes to the XML file that Linden Lab makes to the avatar skeleton file or the XML lad file for the sliders, they can update Blender very quickly, because they just have it create the sliders from those two files. The way I did it in Maya Star is I created the skeleton, and then I manually created the sliders so that they were input connections into the bones. The drawback to that is I will now have to, now that Bento's finally got the Avatar Lad finalized, go through and manually connect all the new sliders and the new bones to the sliders, which is going to take a long time, weeks and weeks worth of work, versus having just the XML file. But there are some good things to it, doing it that way, though. Well, it's hard to explain. Sometimes it's good to do it manually, because if something fundamental is wrong in your computer program, like Blender is using the code to bring in the XML file, if there's a fundamental flaw in it, it's going to be seen every single time, or it may be something that normally doesn't cause an issue, but changes to those files, the XML files for the Avatar Lad or the Avatar Skeleton, it can all of a sudden crop up. Like one of the interesting things that we found out during the Bento, right before it became public right before the NDA was lifted, was that the default avatar mesh, it uses different, it uses the pivot points for the joint rotation that are in the avatar skeleton. And there's a lot of joints in the avatar skeleton where the pivot point is not the same as the position point, where the position of the bone is. But any mesh you upload, using a DAE file, it doesn't use the pivot point, it uses the bone position, so that there's these little discrepancies between the two. And that causes issues if you're trying to make clothes fit a default avatar mesh, clothes that are really, really tight to the skin. And Matrice and Gaia and myself, since we're a tool maker, we're trying to make our tools as accurate as possible. So these little tiny differences drive us nuts. And so originally Avastar we didn't know about this slight change, the slight difference between how the default avatar mesh is controlled using the pivot points versus DAE mesh, which pivot points are controlled by the position of the bone. And so when Avastar originally created their program to bring in the XML files, it didn't know about that. So that's causing some issues, which means they got to go back and rewrite parts of the program, which is more work than just manually changing it in MayaStar. Okay, so Elizabeth's asking exactly. Okay, I'll try to explain this. Okay, if you look at the avatar skeleton XML file, you'll see that each bone, except for the collision bones, all the bones, the M bones, including the new bones, have a pause value, which stands for position, and it has a pivot value. Now, the default avatar mesh that I'm wearing the standard Linen Lab default avatar mesh. I'm not wearing a custom avatar mesh. It's not, how can I put this? When the arms move, or the arms bend and the joints bend, it is the pivot value that determines where the bone is basically rotating from, the pivot. But any mesh you upload as a DAE file ignores the pivot information from the avatar skeleton file, and it uses the bone position to determine where that pivot point is. And so if you were to take a default avatar mesh and have it, say, in Maya, and it's rigged to the skeleton, and you were to upload, even if it has perfect weights, and you export it out as a DAE file and you were to wear it, at the same time you don't hide your avatar, you would see that the two mesh don't match up exactly. They're like, in some places, just a little bit off here and there. And that's because the DAE file is using the position of the avatar skeleton file, the pause value, the position value for the pivots, instead of the pivot value. And so they get off. The way you have to compensate, or at least the way I compensate for this in Maya, is I make the actual bones in Maya when I'm setting up the skeleton. I don't use the position values to set up the skeleton. I use the pivot values to set up where the bones are supposed to be. And and then I rig anything to that basic skeleton, because that way when you import it, the mesh is in the correct position and it bends correctly in the correct places, and then the mesh matches up perfectly. In fact, I can show you. let me just because I was working on this the last couple of days, trying to get the wiki files ready. So now you can see my avatar. I'm wearing a mesh I uploaded, and my skin should be flickering. You should see white all over the place. And the flickering you're seeing is because the faces are exactly on top of each other. And so as I move, you'll see it, you know, so that's how you can tell if you have it perfect. Now the face isn't perfect. That's because of the new face bones we added and we rigged to the face bones. The other thing you have to be aware of is that the weights for the default avatar, and I think Maydu brought this up, was that the weights for the default avatar on Linden Labs viewers, the weights of that avatar are different than all other third-party default avatars. They use slightly different weights, and although they're very slight, they're very, you know, so that can cause an issue if you're trying to make something that fits exactly perfectly. Yeah, you'll notice all the new bento bones, the pivot values and the rotation, the pivot values and the pause values are all identical. We made that even though the pivot values are ignored by all mesh that's uploaded by DAEs. We did that so there's no confusion. But all the original M bones, there's a good number of them that the pivot value is different than the position value. And sometimes they're not even symmetrical. I think it's like the shoulders or the wrists. That the pivot values for the left and right arms or the left and right hands or wrists are actually not exactly mirrored. So it's weird. Then you got to take into account that the default female shape is not the same as the skeleton in some respects. Like for some reason they decided that the butt was too big. The default shape for the butt was too big, so they made, instead of the default being a value of 30, which means the morph is not applied, either bigger or smaller. When the morph is in neutral position or 0 is applied to that morph, they decided that the default avatar shape, when you create a new shape in your inventory for the butt, should be set at, the slider should be set at 25. And then the same goes true for like the eye spacing. They thought her eyes were too far apart, so the default setting for a new shape, I think the eyes are closer together or wider apart. No, I think they're wider apart. So there's a number of settings like that, which all just drive me crazy. Well, if you're going to recreate the sliders, you're going to have to become extremely familiar with the avatar LAD file, because that's where all the slider information is contained. You know, but feel free, if you have Maya Star, if you have Maya, I'll give you Maya Star, and if you need to look for the values in that, you know, if you need to know the values that, because I actually went through, see, this is the benefit and the drawback. Matrice and Gaia, they wrote the program so it would just read the avatar LAD XML file. And I didn't know how to do that type of programming. Still don't quite know how to do that type of programming. So I had to go through the Avatar LAD and manually calculate with a calculator the default position, the extreme 100%, when you move the slider all the way to the right, where the bone would be if it moves, if the scales change, if it's a collision bone, if it rotates, whatever it is, and then move the slider and then calculate all that for the slider position for all the way to the left. And there are thousands of calculations I had to do manually to figure out those numbers so that I could create those drivers for the sliders. Because when I started MayaStar, I didn't know how to mel script that well. I still don't know how to mel script for it to read an XML file. So I learned mel scripting as I went along. So I really had to do it manually. But the nice thing about doing it manually is it gave me a lot of insights into the Avatar LAD, that I wouldn't have known otherwise. No, I don't Blender. Teppel was asking. I don't know how Blender exactly. I know Blender. They wrote the program, a code to read the actual Avatar LAD and the actual XML file and the Avatar skeleton XML file, and then it creates the sliders automatically because it reads those files, which has a lot of advantages. They're probably the same concept. They're probably the same sort of concept, but I don't know Blender well enough to say if they actually work exactly the same. In Maya, you have a driver and a driven. The bone is the driven, and then whatever you're making the driver be, whether the driver is in Maya, how I did is I created a locator, and a locator is just a little, like X marks the spot object. It's not even an object, it's just what they call a locator. It's just a point in 3D space, and then I connected the bone to that locator, so you make the locator the driver and the bone the driven, and you set 3 points, the default position, and then you move the locator in X, Y, or Z, and then you move the bone in to where it's supposed to be, and then you create a keyframe. Basically, you create a key, not a keyframe, but a key, so that when you move that locator to that position, it automatically moves the bone to that position. And that's why I had to calculate the extremes, the slider, the appearance slider to the far right, the appearance slider to the far left. Yeah, it's probably basically the same basic concept. But I believe Avastar doesn't do it using those type of drivers, though. Right, yeah. Matrice is he's only been with Avastar, I believe, for about the last year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So he didn't originally write the Avastar program. Gaia was working with somebody else, and the two of them together put it. And so he kind of wished, Matrice kind of said he had wished that they had used drivers instead of the method that they ended up using. Yeah, I wish I had learned coding first. Because yeah, it would have been a lot easier, a lot faster to write a program to read the XML files and then have the appearance sliders and stuff be automatically generated. That probably would have saved me probably about 4 to 6 months worth of work. um, oh, awesome! Yeah, the only previous programming experience I had was a little bit of Linden Lab scripting. Just pretty much an intermediate beginner. And I did some HTML years and years ago. Oh, and of course basic language back in 1983 for the computer. Just a little bit. My first computer was a Radio Shack TSR 80 or Trash 80. Yeah, I just turned 51 a couple of, like 2 months ago. Oh yeah, I remember Commodores. I always wanted one, but I didn't get one. Yeah, my first portable computer was a hand-me-down from my dad, and it was a 286. And I still have it, and that thing weighs about 30 pounds. 30 pounds, and it has a built-in screen, only 2 colors, and a built-in keyboard, and it has what is those 3 1/4 floppy inch floppy drive. You're right. It's just the type of chip, I think. 86, 386, 486. Used to be called IBM clone computers. My TSR 80 used to have to load the programs off of cassette tapes. You had a cassette tape and you stick in the cassette, hit play, adjust the volume, and then go make a sandwich. While a simple program like something that would be the equivalent of Notepad would take about 10 minutes to load. Oh yeah, I remember those. Yeah, my friend, the typewriters got so sophisticated where they even had those little diskettes where you could type and save what you typed onto a diskette instead of just having it on paper. At a thrift store a couple of months ago, and a young guy in his late teens, early 20s was fascinated by this mechanical typewriter. Oh no, it was an electric typewriter. That's right, it was an electric typewriter. And he was amazed how similar it was to computer keyboards. Okay, see you now.